Worship our King. Come, let us bow at His feet. He has done great things. See what our Savior has done. See how His love overcomes. He has done great things. He has done great things. Oh, hero of heaven, you conquered the grave. You free every captive and break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We stand in your freedom, awake and alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. Been faithful through every storm. You'll be faithful forevermore. You have done great things, and I know you will do it again. For your promise is yes and amen. You will do great things. God, you do great things. The grave, you free every captive and break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We stand in your freedom, awake and alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. You conquer the grave, you free every captive and break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We stand in your freedom, awake and alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. You have done great things. Oh God, you do great things.
Hey folks, hope you're doing well today. I'm David Robinson, and I'm really grateful you're tuning in to CCC's online service. I hope it's the highlight of your week. I don't know if you've ever had a knot like in your shoestring or something, and you kind of tug and tug and tug at it, trying to unwind it all. And you might accidentally usually pull a particular point, a particular string, and somehow that string, that strand is the focus of the entire knot, the entire problem. I mean, you pull and pull and pull, and when you get to that one loop or that place in that knot, then somehow all the confusion, all the deadlocks of the knot are focused there, but the whole thing falls open because you pull that string. Well, what we're going to talk about today is the string. It's the strand that can open up all the knots, all the log jams when it comes to our life and faith and relationship with God. If you have a Bible in one way, shape, or form, get to the 14th chapter of the book of John, the Gospel of John. In this section here, where Jesus is talking to his disciples, his closest followers, he kind of talks about that knot. Now check it out, beginning in verse 6 of chapter 14. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? You know, trend experts say that the more high-tech our society becomes, the more we yearn for the personal. The more high-tech society gets, the more important high-touch is to us. The more we feel alienated from one another, the more longing for the personal that we have. And the last year and a half have certainly accentuated this for so many. In the simplest way to think about it, we kind of get this. If any of you have ever had a problem with your TV cable provider or internet provider, maybe your cell phone provider, and you've had to call in, you long for the personal, because what happens is when you call in, it's usually some automated mechanical push button computer voice, and they say like, push 1 if you have a question about your bill, or push 2 if you're having a problem with your service, or push 3 if you want to add to your service, push 4, on and on. And I don't know about you, but I've had an issue or problem or some question that doesn't really fit into any of those categories. So I'll be at a crossroads, and sometimes I've pushed a button in one of the categories. I've been hoping that it might lead me down the right path, but it doesn't. So I'll say, I'd like to speak to someone. And the answer I've gotten back before, you may have as well, they say, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Push 1 if you have a question about your bill. Push 2 if you're having a problem with your service. Push 3 if you want to add to your service. Push 4, And so you say it again. I want to speak to someone. And you keep saying that until eventually you're so frustrated after a while that you're kind of shouting through the phone, I want to talk to a real person. Put a real person on the phone. You ever had that happen before? It's easy to begin to feel more like a thing than a person. And so what happens is we begin to long for the personal, which is why the Bible tells us throughout, and especially right here in these verses in John, that the solution to this problem and the essence of Christianity is personally knowing God, personal knowledge and knowing of God. That's the first thing the Bible says. That's a priority. Everything else in the Christian faith is a consequence of that and just flows out of that. In fact, it's interesting. If we were to analyze the great prayers of the Bible, I think we'd be shocked to see that when one of these great prayers goes up in the Bible, it's generally not for the things we tend to pray for. Ordinarily, when we pray, we're praying for success and blessing and comfort and things like that. Very seldom are those things the focus of the great prayers we see in the Bible. What those prayers are praying for most often is knowing God and knowing God personally. For instance, in Ephesians 1, the Apostle Paul, he prays for the church at Ephesus, and he says, I pray that the eyes of your heart will be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you. Or later on, that same book, Ephesians 3, says, I pray that you might know the love of God. See, we tend to be obsessed with our needs and our problems and our intellectual questions. We're obsessed with knowing ourselves, when the real problem we've got is we don't know God personally, or maybe we don't know him well enough personally. Personal knowing of God is everything, and it's what Christianity is all about. It's the heart. It's the essence of it. And for a whole lot of us, it's the missing ingredient in our lives. It's the knot that needs to be unhinged for us to really move forward in our faith. Here in John 14 and verse 9, where Jesus says to Philip, Philip, don't you know me even after I've been among you for such a long time? Philip, have I not been with you so long and you still don't know me? He's saying, Philip, I've been with you and you don't know me. It's possible, Philip, to be standing around listening to me, hearing and knowing everything I've taught, to kind of be extremely busy in Christian activities, to be serving people and helping people along the way. All these things Philip had been a part of, and to miss the point. And think about it. Philip was on the inside. He was in the inner circle. He was one of the 12 disciples. He was devoted to Jesus. He was busy with Jesus. He was around Jesus. But Jesus is saying that it's possible to be that close to the action and even be full of great zeal and excitement for him, but just not know him. Jesus is making a distinction between what we might call informational knowing and personal knowing. You can know about God without knowing him personally. Informational knowing and personal knowing. Let's think about the difference for just a moment. If you sit down with somebody to kind of get to know them, at first there's a lot of informational knowledge, just general informational knowledge. Who are you? What's your name? Where are you from? Where do you live? Where do you work? Where do you go to school? Lots and lots of information. And that's a place to start. But eventually you have to cross a line, because if you really want to get to know somebody, you get personal. You begin to talk about issues that actually affect the way you live. You begin to talk about things that really matter to you, that affect the way you feel and the way you do things. And once you're willing to enter into that personal disclosure, the other person, they have the same opportunity. What's really important to them, what really hurts, what really helps, what makes them tick. And if both of you respond with a level of vulnerability and commitment and interest and understanding, then you begin to really know each other. You can begin a friendship. You've moved from informational knowledge to personal knowledge. And maybe you've never thought about it this way before, or no one's pointed out to you this way before. But don't miss this. You can have informational knowledge without personal knowledge, but you can't have personal knowledge without informational knowledge. Stick with me here. You can have informational knowledge without personal knowledge, because you can eavesdrop on other people who do know this person, or you can kind of get things secondhand. So you can get to know a tremendous amount about a person through secondhand information without actually having to go through the personal disclosure and the risk and spending the time and making the commitment that personal knowledge requires. And Jesus is saying that it's not only possible, but it's kind of normal that people who are all around him, being very busy in Christian activities, who may even be very knowledgeable about him, but they've gotten it all secondhand. They don't really know him. Brief sidebar here. Some folks from time to time will say to me, Dave, I wish you wouldn't make such a big deal about the Bible. What's the big deal about the Bible and theology and all this teaching and all that kind of thing? I don't know what to think about the Bible, Dave. I believe that when it comes to God, you basically need to be sincere. But if we understand that Christianity is about personal knowing, it's tough to say I have a personal relationship with this person and I don't know anything about him. That's impossible. In other words, we can know about God without knowing him, but we can't know him without knowing about him. We can have informational knowledge without personal, but we can't have personal without informational. Or better yet, think of it this way. We can know the Bible without knowing God, but we can't know God without knowing the Bible. And that's an important distinction. And Jesus says here in John, later on in chapter 17, he says, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the one true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. See, the point of life, according to Jesus here, is knowing God. It's what you and I were built to do. It was Augustine who wrote, "Thou hast formed us for thyself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in thee." Knowing God is the heart of the matter, and nothing short of that is to be our goal. Christianity is primarily a relationship with a person, with God the Father through his son Jesus. And maybe you've kind of approached this whole thing like, information about God was enough. Like you thought being able to answer the trivia questions about God was enough. I meet a lot of folks who kind of live like that. And Jesus is saying clearly here in John 14 to Philip and to us that a personal relationship with God the Father through Jesus is the crux of the matter. And it's what we're going for, and nothing less will substitute for it. Now, I understand that for some, all this is incredibly problematic, that Christianity is too personal because it sets up a priority, an order of things that a whole lot of people don't like. A lot of folks, for instance, have questions or issues, some of which tend to be intellectual questions, some tend to be, psychological questions. We have questions like, I'd like to be a Christian, I'd like to follow Jesus, but why does God allow such evil and suffering in the world? Or why did this happen to me in my life? Or why did this happen to them? Or why did God let that happen? Or what about all the people who never heard about Jesus? What's God going to do with them? Or how am I going to get rid of this enslaving habit? What's Jesus going to do to change me? Or what's being a Christian going to do to my beliefs? Is it going to change my beliefs? Or how in the world do you turn the other cheek exactly? I've never really understood that. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. So what happens is we got all these questions and we start there. But in a sense, the Bible, the New Testament in particular, it's so unbelievably focused and it's single-minded in a sense because it says, you want to start with you, your questions, your issues. And most of that will not make sense to you until you first answer the question, who's Jesus? What do you make of Jesus? Do you accept what he said about himself? That he's the Son of the living God, the high King of heaven, the Lord of all. And if he's the Lord of all, that includes you. If you read John's gospel, and you should, that's what you get over and over again. Who is Jesus? What do you make of Jesus? Who do you think he is? What are you going to do with him and what he says about himself, among other things? And we might say, Dave, I've got all these intellectual questions. And if Christianity was primarily a philosophy, we could go to the questions first. But since it's a personal relationship, we got to go to the person first. And a lot of people say, what about my needs? I got deep needs. What's Jesus going to do about that? And if Christianity was a therapy first, we could start there. But it's a personal relationship first. And therefore, we got to put first things first and then go on to those other things. It's like this in a marriage. You understand this. Whoever's familiar with marriage, you'll get this. Many times married people are trying to do logistics or take care of the business side of marriage. And there's a lot of logistics and a lot of business involved in marriage. A lot of things you got to do together and figure out together and sort through together. But ever so often, your wife or your husband stops you and says, hey, wait a minute. We can't deal with all these logistical things right now because our relationship is not right. And until our relationship is sorted out, there's nothing else we can do and talk about but that. We got to get first things first. And they're right. Because marriage is only secondarily a logistical partnership, and it's primarily a personal knowing, a relationship. And if that's not right, none of the rest of it works. The Bible says there's a lot to tell you about culture. There's a lot to tell you about philosophy. There's a lot to tell you about psychology. Lots to tell you about all the things you're talking about. But Christianity is first and primarily coming to a person. And if we don't make sense of that and take steps in that direction, then not much else will make sense. We got to go to Jesus personally. It's the missing ingredient. Sometimes something that can get in the way are the absolute and exclusive claims of Jesus that people in our culture tend to hate so much. In fact, the first verse we read there comes across as pretty exclusive. Verse 6, where Jesus says, hey, I'm the way and the truth and the life, and nobody comes to the Father except through me. That crawls all over people's skin. Jesus says, if I'm going to be in your life, there can be no halfway things. I have to be the way, the truth, and the life. I got to be number one. And a lot of folks can't stand that. Many, for example, will say, hey, why is there only one truth? Why should he be the only life? Well, it's because he's a person. And because Christianity ultimately is a personal thing. Anybody watching or listening to this who has ever begun to get into any kind of personal relationship has started to kind of lose control of their life. That's the way of personal knowing. It's just the dynamic at work. Think about this. Some people say, I don't want to get married because I don't want to lose my independence. I don't want to lose control of my life. But if you don't want to lose control of your life, then you're going to have to avoid a lot more than marriage, because the minute you get into any friendship, you begin to lose control of your life. I mean, for instance, suppose you're in a friendship and you think this person is a really good friend. And then one day that person calls you up and says, well, guess what? The last 2 months I've been thinking about this and I haven't told you about this, but I've decided I've got to leave Maryland. And so the movers are on their way and I thought I'd say goodbye. How would you feel about that? Well, right away, you got to be a little disappointed, because you say, I thought we were friends. I mean, if we were friends, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you let me know you were thinking about this or wrestling with this or going through this? I thought you might have wanted my input about it all. You intrinsically know that the deeper a relationship is, the less that person has a right to act independently. C.S. Lewis, he has this tremendous quote in The Four Loves. He said, if you don't want your heart to be broken, give it to no one. But then it will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, and irredeemable. So he's saying if you avoid personal knowing to keep control of your life, well, you're going to lose control of your life anyway. All right. So if we know this, that it's impossible to get into any sort of real committed relationship without some sort of loss of ourselves, does it surprise us to have a relationship with the great person in all of life, Jesus, that if he really is God, if Jesus really is the greatest person in the universe, doesn't it make sense that to get into a relationship with him would bring about incredible demands that would require absolute commitment and in some cases total loss of control? That's why Jesus can say, I'm the way and the truth and the life. I mean, let's kind of work backwards with this. He says, I am the life. That means he's got to be the absolute reason we live. He's not a help for our career. He's the reason for our career. He's not a help for our life. He's the reason for our life. He says, I got to be the reason you get up in the morning. I got to be first in your life. He says, I'm the truth. And that means that his teaching has to have precedence over our feelings, over our opinions, over public opinions, over the opinion of our friends, over the opinion of the experts. He says, I got to be the truth. And then he says, I'm the way. And oh my goodness, how this bugs us. But that's the way it is with people. I mean, do you see? We can't find ourselves to a person just any way we choose. We have to be let in from the inside. Like, you want to get to know somebody, let's say. You say, I want to get to know you. And they say, okay, let's meet for coffee on Tuesday. Well, what if you say, no, I don't want to meet for coffee on Tuesday. It's got to be right here, right now. I want to go to Chick-fil-A and I don't want coffee. We can't do that. Number one, you can't do that because Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays. But number two, you can't do that because you can't get to a person unless they let you in from the inside. If that person says, what's over coffee on Tuesday? It's got to be over coffee on Tuesday or you're not going to get in. By saying right here, right now, you're treating that person impersonally and you're using that person and you'll just never get in. Think of it like this. Maybe this will help. Let's say there's a guy who's a great athlete, just a tremendous baseball player, let's say, totally hypothetical in the Baltimore area. Okay. But go with me here. Tremendous baseball player. And he falls for this woman and he says, hey, I'd like to get to know you. And she says, well, I don't really know anything about baseball. Sports essentially mean nothing to me. I don't know the difference between a three-pointer and a home run. But what really, really gets me excited is the theater, Broadway musicals and plays and all that. Well, what does that athlete do if he wants to get to know her? If he really wants to become a friend of hers, what's he say? Does he say, well, I could care less about the theater. We're going to talk about baseball. So here's a book on baseball rules. Study this, and then you'll appreciate what I do. When it comes to people, you just can't say, I'm going to get to your heart any old way I please. Hearts open up from the inside, and Christianity is a faith of revelation, which means God has opened himself up to us. Christianity says you don't find God through your efforts or your discovery. He comes to you. Here's the way in. And so when the woman says to the guy, this is the way, you want to get to know me, you want to get to understand me, you want to have a good relationship with me, well, here's how. And the guy says, no, it's got to be another way. She says, there is no other way. I'm a person. I'm not a, mathematical equation. I'm not a mystical force. And in the same way, Jesus can say, I'm the way to the Father because God's a person. This is the way. Does that seem exclusive? Because that's the way every other human being, every person you've ever met, that's the way they are. And that's the way you are. I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, Jesus says. Do you know him? I mean, really know him? Or do you just know a little about him? Is there a personal dealing between you and him? Now, you may be saying, Dave, how do I know if I know him? I mean, you've been talking about the importance of knowing him. How do I know? Well, Jesus says there in verse 9, it's seeing. When Philip says, Jesus, show us the Father, and then everything will be all right, Philip uses a specific Greek word that literally means give us an appearance, give us a vision, show us the Father by a miracle, something grandiose. And a lot of us think that would be the way to go. But Jesus knows that lots of people saw him face to face, witnessed all kinds of miraculous things he did, thousands of people. He knows that's not what we need. So Jesus says, Philip, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And Jesus uses a specific word, a Greek word that's extremely important. There are two Greek words for see. There's the word for see, which means to see something with the retina in your eye. And there's another word for see, which means to understand. And that's the word that Jesus uses. But we in our English, we have to use the word in both ways. We say, I see you with my eye, but we also say, oh, I see. I get it. I understand. Like, I see the Orioles play baseball, but I get that the Orioles stink at playing baseball. Am I being too harsh on the Orioles? Maybe. Maybe not. Anyway, here's what it means to know God, the way that you can tell if you know God. It affects you in several ways. It affects you intellectually. It affects you emotionally. It affects you volitionally. For instance, here's a woman. She's got a very intellectual faith. She can talk all the time about religious and philosophical issues, but there's no change happening in the way she behaves. There's no real character growth in love and joy and peace and humility and self-control and grace. Or here's a man and he's got an emotional faith. I mean, boy, he gets excited. You see the thrill he gets when the music kicks in on a Sunday morning service. Sometimes you'll see the tears throughout the service, but there's no actually change going on in his life, volitionally, or even with his thinking, like intellectually. There's no change. Or here's a person who has a volitional faith, very intentional, somebody who's very disciplined and dutiful and deliberate in everything they do, but is pretty cold. There's no warmth to it. There's not a sense of the presence of a shepherd, the good shepherd in their life. Everything's mechanical. There's not a sense that they're being dealt with, that God is doing something in them and with them and through them day in and day out. What it means to know God is that information stops being information and it sinks down to where it has this personal impact and affects your heart until it affects all three ways, intellectually, emotionally, volitionally. Some of us are just like Philip. We've been around Jesus or the things of Jesus, but we don't know him. And maybe we thought that was enough, just being around and knowing about him. But Jesus says you got to keep going. First things first. Do you know him? Is he real to you? Is a personal knowing of God through Jesus an ingredient in your life day in and day out? Some of you might be saying, I know enough to know that I long for it. Then whatever's getting in your way, just get rid of it. If it's busyness, if it's a lack of understanding, if it's resentment towards God, if it's a bad relationship, if it's disobedience, if it's just plain old laziness, just sell everything and get this. Nothing is worth keeping to lose this. because it's what you and I were made for. Some of you might be realizing, I don't really know him at all. Then roll up your sleeves and start to discover who he is personally. What are you waiting for? We got a Discover class that's kicking off in a week. That'd be a good place to begin. Maybe starter group. Really, any small group, that'd be a good thing to jump into. And I'd say get into the Bible and deal with this. I'd start with the Gospel of John that we're reading out of here today. There are 21 chapters in John. Do a chapter a day. 21 chapters in 21 days and get clarity on who Jesus is. Do you know him or do you just know about him? Thou hast formed us for thyself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee.
We're going to celebrate communion together. It's something we do each week when we gather like this. Go ahead and get your bread and your juice so you can fully participate. We take the bread because it represents Jesus' body that he gave up for us. And we drink the juice because it reminds us of his blood that was poured out on the cross. Communion is an opportunity each week for us to remember that at the very heart of our relationship with God is the sacrifice of Jesus. Through his death, burial, and resurrection, God has made a way for us to be forgiven, to be made right, and to be made whole. I encourage you to take a few moments and think about God's incredible love for you. Let's celebrate communion now.
God of love, God of all glory, every day I see new mercy. Great is your faithfulness. God of love, God of my story, you never fail, you never forsake me. Great is your faithfulness. I see you in the morning light, I feel you in the fire by night. I hear you say, child, I am with you, everything will be alright. I see you in the tears that run, I feel you when the healing comes. I hear you say, beloved, I am with you, every moment of my life. I see you, God, I see you. God of love, God of new vision, every blessing you have given. Great is your faithfulness. How great is your faithfulness. I see you in the morning light, feel you in the fire by night. Hear you say, child, I am with you, everything will be alright. I see you in the tears that run, feel you when the healing comes. I hear you say, beloved, I through the storm, through the storm, through the storm. All my hope is in you, Lord, in you, Lord, in you, Lord. I will worship through the storm, through the storm, through the storm. All my hope is in you, Lord, in you, Lord. I see you in the morning light, I feel you in the fire by night. I hear you say, child, I am with you, everything will be alright. I see you in the morning light, I feel you in the fire by night. I hear you say, child, I am with you, everything will be alright. I see you in the tears that run, I feel you when the healing comes. I hear you say, beloved, I am with you, every moment of my life. I see you, I see you, I see you, God, I see you.
Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. If you'd like to support CCC's efforts to help people find their way back to God, you can text CCC White Marsh to the number on the screen, or just head to communitycc.net and click the Give tab. There are a few things headed your way that you might want to check out. There's a budgeting workshop this week that could really help as you get ready for the holidays. Costume Sunday is coming up on the 31st, so all of your kiddos are invited to wear their costumes to church that day. And there'll be some sweet treats out back after service, and we'll have a photo booth set up. Don't miss that. And then on November 7th is another Food Truck Sunday. Check out the lineup at communitycc.net. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to say hi on social media. See you next week, everybody.